Hi there everybody, welcome back to my channel, Boomy Reactions. For those of you who are new, I'm Boomy, hello and thank you for watching. And for everyone else, welcome back my lovelies. And today guys, I have another Lost in the Pond video to share with you. Yes, we've got double Lawrence today. So in this video guys, we've got 7 myths British people believe about America, part 1. There's a part 2. Right, okay. I'm a little bit divided on these videos, guys, because I think there's a bigger divide between older generations in the UK and the younger generations, because the younger generations are so much more influenced by, American TV, film, music, just culture in general, really. So I feel like the younger generations are a lot more in the know about Americanisms and American kind of way of life. So it's not that weird to us. Yes, that's right. I am identifying as one of the younger generations. Whereas the older generations, I feel they haven't been as heavily influenced as such. And therefore, a lot of the differences seem a lot more vast and they're a lot more noticeable. And I would say they're a little bit further removed from the culture. Does that make sense? So I don't know. I think some of these things that Lawrence points out, I think some of them apply to older generations of Brits, and then not so much the younger ones, but we'll wait and see. They're always funny. But yeah, I would love to see a video of the other way round. So, myths that Americans believe about British people. That would be rather interesting. I'd like to see some of those. But for now, let's catch up with Lawrence. Here we are, guys. And as ever, if you're enjoying these reactions, please like and subscribe to the channel. And I thank you.
Hello, this video is sponsored by BritBox, the premier streaming service for Britain's most beloved TV shows. I'm Lawrence Brown and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to myths. Specifically, myths that British people, including myself at one point, believed about the United States of America.
I've only just noticed his t-shirt. I love that t-shirt. Does he do merch? Does Lawrence have merch? I love those red frames. They really suit him, don't they?
But it is amazing what 14 years of living in the United States will do to your understanding and your perceptions about this very country. For instance, I learned early on that they don't have Cornish pasties, and I learned slightly less earlier on, so later, that Michigan has them. But I don't live in Michigan, so one way or another I still have to have them imported. A quick
Oh, no way. Oh, if I moved to... Do you know what? There's a handful of things I would miss about the UK if I moved to the US. One of them would be a good pasty. So I'd either have to find the nearest best thing, which I'm sure there is, or like Lawrence said, you'd have to get them imported, and they're never going to taste the same. Nothing beats a fresh Cornish pasty, guys. If you come and visit the UK, do try one. They're delicious.
Reminder that if you're not subscribed to this channel, you can change that fact about your life right now. But these myths go way beyond the absence of quintessentially British food. And so now that I've lived here for about a seventh of a century, it's time to outline some of the myths that us British believe about America and Americans. This is a funny one, because I think television gives us this notion that Americans do all live in giant houses like the McAllisters do in Home Alone. But
that's hilarious. That was literally going to be the next thing that came out my mouth. So it's Home Alone's fault. It definitely is. As a young child, one of the first, kind of slightly maturer films that you're going to watch at Christmas time is going to be Home Alone. And the look of Kevin's large, gorgeous house on that lovely, lovely looking road, lit up with the lights, and the house is a big feature in the film, isn't it? Because he booby traps the house, and and the burglars are keeping an eye on it. So it is a big focal point of the film. But as a result, an awful lot of British kids, and probably other countries as well, do have this idea that every American house is like this, which of course, as you get a little bit older, you realize, well, no, because it's not like that in the UK. We all live in different shape, size houses, big, small, terrace, detached, all sorts. Um, so, so you'd like to think that as you get a little bit older, you're gonna start thinking, well, no, everyone surely can't live in houses like this. There's such a huge variety of houses. Maybe not. But yes, it is totally Home Alone's fault.
It's not entirely the case. Sure, I mean, statistically, American houses are on average
They're still
larger than their
big.
UK counterparts.
Yeah.
There are a number of reasons for this, which I outlined in this video. But to say that all Americans live in really large houses is a complete fabrication
It
of
would be
anything
silly, yeah.
resembling the truth. And I was a good example of this before I became a YouTube sensation, because when I first moved to Chicago, we had to do things on a budget. Between me and my wife, we weren't making a great income, and this is a major city, so we had to sort of settle for an apartment whose dimensions were 300 square feet. And for those of you who don't know, that's about the size of a shoebox, roughly. You know, we had to leave our shoes outside the door. That's how small it was.
Oh,
and it is worth
wow.
reiterating, I think, that the cost of living in the United States does fluctuate massively across the country.
Oh my gosh, I imagine. Yeah, absolutely. But even in the UK, so it's a widely accepted thing that land over here, because we're a tiny little island, so land is a little bit more sought after. So I think it tends to push the value of the land up as well. So house prices become a little bit ridiculous over here. I know the market does always tend to fluctuate, but yeah, house prices, they're generally, you will get much less with your money. I'd imagine if you had the same amount of money and wanted to move to the US and you were house hunting, I imagine you would, you know, square foot per square foot, you would definitely get a lot more for your money because you've got more land. You're a much bigger country. And of course, that goes without saying that every state, you know, there's going to be different places in the states as well. It's all going to be different state by state, and then region by region and area by area. Absolutely. But generally speaking, yes, that makes sense.
I lived in Indiana, just one state over. We were paying about $530 a month. That's basically unheard of in Chicago. And it's certainly unheard of in New York City, which of course was the city in which the show Friends is set. And I think it shows like that gave us this impression that Americans were all living in big apartments.
They do have big apartments, don't they?
And speaking of houses, I was alerted to a tweet recently from a British person who couldn't believe that American addresses go way up into the thousands. And their belief on this was that every street in the United States has thousands of houses on it.
That
and
one is
this was a
true.
belief that I used to have.
Yes.
Because the country is absolutely massive. So you almost expect it to have to house that many people. But the thing is, there are way fewer people in this country per square mile than there are in Britain. So it doesn't add up. And that's when I got looking into it. And in a previous video, I outlined it doesn't really work like that. On any given street, they don't start at the number 1 and then end at 10,000. Often, and it's the case here in Chicago, you'll usually have a string of houses, for example, all in the 6,000s on a given street.
Oh.
And that's because it's about 6 miles from the center of downtown. 1 mile in from that, they're all 5,000s. Another mile, they're all 4,000s, etc.
Well, that makes so much sense. Yes. Received a handful of packages, and just looking at the addresses, you read the address and you think 1056 house on this street, and the immediate reaction to us is, oh my gosh, that must be such a big street, you've got 1,000 houses on that street. Okay, that explanation makes so much more sense. Yes. So our streets don't operate like that. We have a street and then so many houses that live on the street, but it rarely goes over like 200 maybe, depending on the street. You know, some streets are really, really big. Well, big by UK standards anyway. And yeah, so we just apply that same kind of knowledge. It's not the same, is it? Okay, so, well, that's why we would assume that you have very large streets with over 2,000 houses, because that's just how our streets work. So, oh, that is funny.
etc., etc. Now, not every city in the US does it from the center of the city. It could be
Oh,
from
okay.
another part of the city or just some other central point. But that's sort of a general rule for how the numbering works on US houses.
Now I know.
This one comes up again and again, that the United States is such a young country that it basically doesn't have a history. And
Oh
I've always
no,
thought of
that's
this
silly.
perception of America to be quite a lazy one. Because even if you go back to 1776 through to the present day, yes, it is a short amount of time in comparison to the history of Britain, but think about all of the insane things that happened in that period. And even if you ignore all that, there's one thing that we tend to forget because we don't get taught it very deeply in Britain, and that is the
Indigenous
thousands of years
peoples.
of native history that happened before we even turned up. I was
Yes.
absolutely blown away, not literally, that would be weird, when I went to Cahokia Mounds here in Illinois. Many, many hundreds of years ago, Cahokia Mounds used to be a native city, and it had about 20,000 people, which might not sound like a lot
But at
by
the
both
time-
American and British standards, but back in the day, that was more than London. And I once read about this volcano eruption that happened in present-day Oregon a few thousand years ago. And this eruption was witnessed and recorded by Native Americans who were in the area at the time. And long story short, they basically saw the origins of Crater Lake, which is absolutely huge.
The
To be honest,
caldera. Oh my gosh. Yes. So it is a bit insulting, isn't it, actually, that that this stereotype exists, that we just take history of the US from the time where the European settlers move over and, the pioneers, and they all migrate and discover new wild and wonderful parts of the US. The the fact that we take your history from beginning then is insulting. Actually, it's wrong. It shouldn't happen. Obviously, there is a diverse history to the US, which it takes place thousands of years earlier than the European settlers, and it's crazy. I don't know if any of you have seen any of my other videos where I've mentioned quite a few times actually that American history isn't traditionally taught in most British schools, which is a shame. I did a module within my GCSE history year, so that was ages 14, 15, 16. And that wasn't the norm. It was a very exciting topic that our teachers decided to teach us about in our curriculum, which was brilliant, but it's not the norm. And it should be, because your history is so diverse and it's so rich. And yes, we should all learn at least a little bit about the history of the USA. It's a shame that young children don't get taught about this, because it is so interesting, as I am finding out. Thank you very much, guys. But yes, yeah, that stereotype. It's I suppose, yeah, that is there.
both Brits and Americans love their myths. I mean, we've got the Loch Ness Monster, you've got a cryogenically frozen Walt Disney. This one is embarrassing for me, because years ago I believed that Canada and the United States were basically the same country. And the reason that I believe that is, number one, I was 12, so cut me some slack. And number two, my only sort of exposure to both countries was through the people, was through the way they spoke. And to my young ears, which couldn't yet differentiate these two accents, Macho Man Randy Savage and Bret Hart basically had the same accent, just with an entirely different timbre. And that's all I had to go on. And I think it's what a lot of British people have to go on, because I still occasionally see those comments. Oh, what is the difference between Canada and America? Or is it essentially that one has Mounties and the other doesn't? And it's only since I moved here that I've become super aware of the substantial difference between the two countries. Completely different healthcare systems, completely different food, completely different use of English. Right, in Britain we call it the loo, in America they call it a restroom, in Canada they call it a washroom. And I've seen all manner of different examples of that kind of thing. In America they don't celebrate Boxing Day, in Canada they do. The Canadian dollar is different to the American dollar. In some ways they go with British English in places that America doesn't. And now that I'm older and I've listened to some of the regionalisms throughout the United States, even the way Americans speak is different to how Canadians speak.
Yes. So this is another one where I would maybe say that the younger generations are a little bit more clued up, with having more exposure to American culture. I think. I think this comes from the fact that we know you've got Canada, and then you've got the USA. But we're using our British brains to kind of think of the size of the continent and compare it to the size of the UK. So I think we think Canada being above the USA is the same as Scotland being on top of England. So, you know, you're pretty close. Maybe the fact that we are England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, collectively with the United Kingdom, Britain, maybe that thought process is kind of carried over to people assuming Canada and the US, same continent, must be a similar thing, like all of our 4 countries being made into the United Kingdom. So maybe that factors into it. I don't think it's as rude as disregarding your cultures and just assuming you're the same. I think maybe it is a case of applying British geography skills to everywhere else. But that is an interesting one. Yeah. Yes, yeah.
I'm not an expert on that, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but these differences certainly go way beyond how the 2 countries pronounce the word about.
About.
I've touched on this before, but I couldn't really do a video without including it in this list. This perception that Americans are loud and boisterous. And I can understand on some level where that comes from, because I think the way Americans speak, it comes from a different part of the throat. So it's a bit more projected, right? Whereas us Brits, it's more sort of, I don't know, understated a lot of the time. I think another reason that we think Americans are loud is how they present themselves in films. There might even have been a time in my life where I thought all Americans were loud just because Jim Carrey was. He's Canadian, isn't he? He is Canadian. And culturally speaking, I definitely have found that Americans speak at a higher volume when they're in restaurants together. But there are so many other examples of the opposite being true. On match day, after we've had a pint or 6, you know, we're singing the songs of our team who we love because they happen to be situated in the town that we were born in.
And it's far more likely that, you know, you're going to come across a boozy British person being too loud. Maybe, I don't know. So I do not personally know enough Americans to even comment on that. But what I might say might factor into this is that, I don't know, Americans, you all seem so much more confident than we are. Like, I think we're a little bit more reserved, but I don't know whether that is just, I don't know, is that like a generational thing in the UK? Are we more reserved? I acquired my nickname, my Boomy nickname, because I was considered a loud child and talking a lot, as some of you might have guessed. I talk a lot, and yeah, I'm being loud. So I don't think I'm loud though, am I? Just a little bit. But yeah, that is an unusual one. I don't think that's a stereotype that kind of lingers around the younger generations. I think maybe that's a bit outdated, but I don't know. I don't think that's a negative thing. I don't think it's a case of, oh, everyone thinks Americans are so loud. No, maybe, you know, you have more confidence than us. I think, do you have like debate teams in schools and things like that? And I think you're generally encouraged to, again, this is stereotypes. I don't know like enough of Americans to even really comment about this, but from what I've seen stereotypically on TV and films, there seems to be a little bit more of a push to encourage public speaking and debating, and that's not something we have over here. So maybe it's a skill that's more valued over in the US. Rightly so. I think it should be something that we teach our children. But no, it's not something that's really encouraged so much in the UK, not in that sense anyway. So maybe that factors into it slightly, possibly.
It's just what we do when we leave a nightclub, which, you know, I haven't done in 20 years.
So loud.
But when we did, you know, I'd be on the street yelling at traffic cones, because that might have just been me. But what I'm saying is, when we get drunk, we very much give Americans a run for their money. There's a loud person in all of us, right? And once we free ourselves of our inhibitions, we can let out all of the decibels we want.
Oh my gosh, maybe that's it. Maybe we're just repressed. And at the once we lose our inhibitions with a bit of alcohol, that's it. Our inner massive gob comes out. But it's only when we're a bit tipsy and we've had a few.
That's not a call to action. It's merely an observation.
interesting.
This is
What was
only
this
funny, not because of the image of Americans walking around with bum bags on, but it's because we
What?
call them bum bags and you call them fanny packs, and it's bloody hilarious. It is also partly the visual, because bum bags have never been cool, but this notion, which I occasionally read, that Americans are just always walking around wearing one is very laughable, especially as somebody who's lived here 14 years.
I've
So it's
never
quite
heard that.
dumbfounding, this one. I'm not saying that all British people think this way, but the ones that do, I'd be very interested to hear, do they think that way because they met an American in 1994 and they've just held on to that belief? Or are American tourists still wearing bum bags? Do people carry cash? But I don't. I can tell you this, I don't have a bum bag / fanny pack radar, right? I am not constantly surveilling the populace to see whether they do or do not have a fanny pack.
Do you know what? Okay, I've never heard of the stereotype that it's American tourists that wander around with bum bags. It's just the difference in what we call them, which is pretty funny. In the UK, they're bum bags. They are, because they hang around and by your bum. So the bum bags. But fanny packs in the US, but in the UK, the word fanny has completely different meaning. I know why. Why? I couldn't tell you. But yes, that word is what we would refer as a colloquialism for a lady's private parts. So the term over here it's comical, it's funny. But then again, so's the word bum bag. It's funny because my dad is a tourist who wanders around Spain, Italy, wherever it is that he wants to go to, and he always has a bum bag. He loves them. But what's the alternative, you know? What else are you going to wear? You're not going to go out with your man handbag, are you? So it's a bum bag. Ah, it's funny.
But my feeling is I don't remember seeing one in a while. So I think this is one very time-specific stereotype that can now be laid to rest.
I've never heard of that.
And yes,
Autumn!
I thought I'd include one that was quite topical, not just because we are in the autumn, but also because I mentioned
fall.
this fact on my YouTube short yesterday. Now, while for reasons that were laid out in that YouTube short, Americans prefer the term fall, I was surprised to find that the word autumn was pretty common among Americans. I don't know if this is a recent thing, like the whole country just woke up one morning and watched Lost in the Pond and thought to themselves, yes, we're changing things now. Or if it's just sort of always been here as an alternative to fall. And you might be thinking, ooh, Lawrence, aren't there many surprising word alternatives that Americans use that Brits don't know about? And the answer to that is yes. I merely brought this one up so I could make that very point. This is undoubtedly a pandemic era thing, but I've seen an increasing number of Americans using the word jab to mean shot.
Oh no, I know that one. So why is it? That isn't a really, really interesting one. Why is it that in the US, your seasons are referred to as fall, and why do we use, or we still use, I don't know which came first. We still refer to autumn as autumn, but for you guys it's fall. I'd like to know the any reasoning behind that. That's quite an interesting one. But obviously, if we come over to the US and we, reminisce about it being autumn time because the trees look beautiful in autumn, you're not exactly going to look at us, like vacantly not understanding what we're saying. The term is interchangeable, but you guys do just more frequently use the word fall, right? Yeah, I wonder if there's a reason for that. That is interesting. But whereas we will use the term fall in the UK, but when we refer to the seasons, it's autumn. But it's not like we don't understand. Like if you came over and you said, oh, it's fall, we'd know, it's not that much of a vast vocabulary difference. It still makes sense. I think it's just a word of preference. And this next one, jab, we use the term jab over here. That is an interchangeable one as well. we'd know what it meant.
Once worked with an American colleague who liked to use the word bonkers. So in part because of the internet, just as Britain is taking on quite a few Americanisms, I think the same is true in reverse, and it will be very interesting to look further into those details. And those are just a handful of myths that some Brits believe about America and Americans. Let me know in the comments some of the myths that you've had to dispel about this country. I'm Lawrence Brown. You can follow me on Twitter at LostInThePondUS. And please subscribe to this channel and ensure to click my bell. And if you like what you see, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/lostinthepond. Until the next video, goodbye.
Oh, I'm sure there's so many more funny little interchangeable vocabulary words that we use over here and you use differently over in the US. Guys, if there's any that you can think of that Lawrence hasn't mentioned, let me know in the comments. I can't think of any more off the top of my head. I'm thinking of Kent Rawlins and cackleberries, but not everybody calls eggs cackleberries. I think that might actually just be Kent. Sidewalk and pavement. So a sidewalk, obviously you guys know what a sidewalk is. In the UK, we call it a pavement, the pavement. I'm sure there's more. I just can't think off the top of my head. Roundabouts is another funny one. So you won't drive for long in the UK without coming across a roundabout, especially in built-up areas and cities or towns. Am I right in thinking that they're not a thing in the USA? Is that a myth? Is that another myth? But yeah, that's taking me back to an episode of The Simpsons where they visit the UK and they're just stuck going round and round on a roundabout because they're not sure where to turn off, which is every British new driver as well. So it's just one of those things that you get used to, isn't it, guys? But yeah, do you have roundabouts? I never thought about that. Do you have them? Is it one of those weird, quirky, eccentric British things that is meant to work in principle, but it doesn't actually work in reality? I can't think of any more off the top of my head. There must be so many. Let me know, guys, if you can think of any funny, interchangeable words that we use over here that you don't over there, or vice versa. Let me know. And thank you for watching this video with me, guys. I do enjoy watching Lawrence. He's so funny. And I will catch you on the next video. See you later. Bye-bye.